You know, usually when we talk about problem solving, there's this expectation of intellectual distance.
Right, like sitting at a desk.
Exactly. You're sitting at a desk, looking at a spreadsheet, you find the error, fix the formula, and the problem goes away.
It's very clean, very cerebral.
Yeah, totally clean. But step onto a grappling mat, and that desk vanishes entirely. Today, we're bringing you a deep dive into some excerpts from a highly technical martial arts text. It's called GI Fundamentals Escapes Volume 2.
And, even if you've never set foot on a mat, this text is fascinating.
Oh, it really is. Because what stands out immediately is how it treats escaping the mounted position. I mean,
Right.
anyone listening who rolls knows the absolute suffocating misery of bottom mount.
It's awful.
Yeah.
But the author doesn't treat it like a street fight. They approach it as a masterclass in pure physics.
Right, physics and geometry and problem solving under literal crushing pressure.
Yeah, because you're dealing with another human being who is actively trying to break your physical structure.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to decode the architecture of human leverage. We're going to look at how a smaller person can systematically dismantle a much larger opponent's structural dominance.
And to do that, you have to understand the mechanics.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can escape, we have to understand why we're actually stuck in the first place.
Well, the text diagnoses the bottom mount not just as a bad spot, but as a structural singularity.
A structural singularity. That's intense.
It is, because it's the only pin where the top person's hips are directly over the bottom person's hips. The text calls this a coaxial center of gravity.
Coaxial. That phrasing really caught my eye. Because in other pinning positions like side control or knee on belly, the top person's weight is laterally offset, right?
Exactly. Their center of gravity isn't perfectly aligned with yours.
So because their mass is distributed asymmetrically, they're already, I don't know, partially unbalanced by default.
Right. They have to work to maintain it.
Oh.
But in the mount, their center of gravity is dropped directly down your vertical axis,
Which means they resist displacement in all directions efficiently.
almost perfectly efficiently.
Yeah.
Their mass is anchored dead center. Any escape methodology that fails to move their center of gravity off of your center of gravity is just, well, it's doomed.
You're just going to encounter their full weight.
Exactly. The beginner instinct is to just bench press the opponent straight up,
Yeah.
and that completely ignores the geometry.
It makes me think of trying to move a perfectly stacked, incredibly heavy refrigerator.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Like if you lie on your back and try to bench press a refrigerator straight up into the air, you are going to fail catastrophically.
You're fighting pure mass with zero leverage.
Exactly. You can't push it straight up. You have to tilt it first to compromise its base.
Right. Undermining their stability has to happen before you attempt to move their mass.
So, since pushing straight up fails, how do we tilt the refrigerator?
Well, you take away its legs.
It's away its legs. Which brings us to the foundational logic of the bridge and roll.
Yeah. The core logic here is that you trap one complete side of the opponent's body, an arm and a foot on the same side.
Because once that side is trapped, they can't post.
Right. They can't extend a limb to create a kickstand to stop themselves from falling when you generate that rotational force.
And if you've ever felt this during live rolls, the sheer frustration of gripping is wild. You grab arbitrary fabric on their sleeve, you pull with everything you have, and the fabric simply shifts.
It just bunches up.
Yeah, it bunches up, the tension releases under their weight, and your pulling power just bleeds out into loose cotton.
Which is why the grip mechanics detailed here are hyper-specific.
Wait, why is the text so obsessed with 3 fingers on a seam? If I have their arm, don't I have their arm?
What's fascinating here is that grabbing arbitrary fabric allows for that shifting you mentioned, the longitudinal seam running down the back of the gi sleeve that acts as the garment's structural spine.
Oh, because of the reinforced stitching.
Exactly. Locking 3 fingers precisely on that seam ensures the fabric cannot shift or roll over the forearm. You are directly engaging the strongest structural line available.
And you combine that with the 4-finger grip inside the mouth of the sleeve.
Right. You punch into the sleeve mouth to create a taut tension line. That completely immobilizes the lever of their forearm.
So they have to overcome both distinct grip points at the same time just to pull their arm out.
Which is mechanically exhausting. But even if you secure that structural grip, the bridge itself presents its own hurdles.
Because the moment you lift your hips to bridge, you signal your intent.
Right. Any decent top player instinctively turns their knee outward, on the trap's side.
To widen their base.
Yeah, they widen their base and lower their hips. And if they manage that, your bridge just rolls you over onto your own back.
Which exposes you to an even worse position. But the text introduces a mechanical clamp to prevent this. The elbow over knee lock.
Yes, you literally clamp your elbow over the outside of their knee to physically pin it inward. You shut down their ability to expand laterally.
And the bridging mechanics are super specific, too. Thrusting the hips straight up is a common error, right?
Exactly. That just collides with their center of mass. The feet must be positioned asymmetrically.
And where you look is crucial.
Right, because your cervical spine dictates your thoracic spine, which ultimately dictates your hip drive.
So where you look determines where your rotational torque is channeled. Putting your ear flush to the mat is mandatory.
Looking at the ceiling channels force upward into dead weight, but looking over your shoulder channels the torque laterally.
Carrying their center of gravity past the tipping point. But that covers a static opponent.
And we know a skilled opponent actively fights back. It becomes a chess match of action and reaction.
Right. Like the free hand problem. If they still have their free hand on the untrapped side, they can reach across your center line and post it heavily on the mat.
Which stops the roll dead.
My instinct in that situation used to be just bridging harder, trying to muscle through the post.
But the solution to a structural post is geometrical, never muscular. Overpowering a locked frame is a losing battle.
So you change the angle of attack?
Exactly. Instead of looking toward the blocking arm, you turn your head to look past it.
Adjusting your head and eye angle changes the entire trajectory of your bridge.
Your rotational arc now carries their center of gravity around and over their own extended arm.
Bypassing the blockade completely, you make their post irrelevant instead of fighting it.
But lower body defenses introduce a totally different kind of friction.
Oh man, the grapevine. That is arguably the most frustrating.
Yeah, they weave their feet inside your legs, stretch you out, and force your hips flat to the mat.
And you can't bridge if your hips are pinned to the floor.
The text is absolute on this point. Never attempt to bridge against a grapevine.
Trying to aggressively kick your way out just ends in exhaustion, right?
Or it exposes your back as your hips elevate unevenly. The protocol is to alter the geometry of their hook at the lowest point of leverage.
Which is the toes. You rotate your toes outward, pointing away from their hooking foot, and extend your leg linearly.
Right. That simple rotation changes the angle of your calf muscle, breaking their mechanical grip along the shin.
Allowing you to slide your foot free. And you only reinitiate the bridge after that impediment is cleared.
Exactly. And then there is the crossface.
When they drive their shoulder or forearm into your jaw, physically turning your head away from the direction you want to bridge.
And since we know the cervical spine dictates the bridge direction, this shuts down the technique completely.
But the text offers a counterintuitive response here, misdirectional bridging.
Instead of fighting the pressure of the crossface, you bridge with it.
Because the crossface has maximum mechanical advantage to fight your attempts to turn against it.
Right. If you fight into it, you burn energy against a static wedge.
So by bridging aggressively in the exact direction they're already pushing your head, you exploit their action.
You force them to post a hand to stop that primary bridge.
It's like a magic trick. The moment their hand hits the mat to catch their balance, they have to abandon the crossface pressure.
Because your head is now pinned to the mat on that side by your own movement. Their crossface arm is trapped underneath your head.
And then you immediately bridge back the other way, over the newly trapped arm.
It's forcing them to commit defensive resources to a fake threat.
At advanced levels, this continuous reading of the opponent's weight shifting it evolves into what the text calls a listening skill.
Yeah, you aren't merely reacting visually. You're actively feeling their mass distribute through the contact points of your grips and frames.
You feel where their weight becomes light, and you attack that specific vector.
Which brings us to the paradigm shift.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this was the biggest aha moment of the text for me. At elite levels of grappling, the bridge and roll isn't actually designed to roll the opponent at all.
Right. It functions primarily as a kuzushi generator.
Kuzushi being the Japanese term for off-balancing.
Exactly. The bridge is a tool designed to elicit a very specific, highly predictable reaction from the top player.
You intentionally neglect the foot trap. You secure the arm perfectly, but you deliberately leave their leg free.
And when you initiate a massive explosive bridge, their natural ingrained defense is to widen their knees.
To create a lower, more stable base, they think they're shutting down your sweep.
But by widening their knees, they create a spatial gap between their knees and your hips.
A gap that literally did not exist a second ago. You're programming their defense to hand you the exact key you need to escape.
Because that newly created gap is the exact real estate required to insert your elbow and your knee.
To initiate the elbow escape or the shrimp escape,
The architecture here is unified. These aren't isolated techniques pulled from a hat.
you leverage the legitimate structural threat of the bridge to force them to open the door for the elbow escape.
And stepping through that door requires strict adherence to geometry.
The text calls the elbow escape the ultimate solution, the most consequential bottom skill in jiu-jitsu because it's size independent and fatigue resistant.
But you can't just start shrimping your hips while they're sitting upright in the mount.
Right, because their full gravitational weight is pressing straight down through their femurs. Their legs feel like they're bolted to the floor.
Which brings us to prerequisite one. Weight forward.
You have to place a forearm frame horizontally across their belt line.
And drive a knee sharply into their lower back, wedging them forward until they are forced to put their hands on the mat above your head.
Because shifting their center of mass forward onto their hands proportionally unloads their lower body.
Their knees and ankles become significantly lighter. They transition from immovable anchors to manipulable levers.
Prerequisite 2 is the belly button line, and the text treats this like a hard, non-negotiable boundary.
The opponent's hips must stay strictly below your belly button.
It's like a laser tripwire in a spy movie. The moment the opponent's hips cross it, sliding their knees up into your armpits into a high mount, alarm should go off.
Because the necessary angles completely disappear.
Yeah.
Your elbow can no longer reach their ankle without physically impossible contortions.
So if they cross that line, all escape attempts must halt. You have to physically walk your shoulders backward on the mat, inchworming away to drag their hips back down.
Resecuring the perimeter.
Yeah.
And assuming you maintain that and their weight is forward, you deploy the ankle-first method.
Right. Because attempting to slide your knee behind their calf muscle merely pushes their leg outward. It doesn't capture it.
The correct mechanic involves straightening one leg flat to the mat to slide your knee inside their ankle, wedging underneath the shin bone.
You push down heavily with your framing elbow on their thigh, levering their foot up into the air.
And lock it in place with your other leg to form a triangle lock.
You're creating a two-point lever. The knee drives up against the shin, the elbow drives down against the thigh.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the elbow escape works through progressive geometric reorganization, not explosive athletic power.
Because once that ankle is secured in the triangle lock, a simple lateral shift of your hips effortlessly levers their knee off the mat.
The friction is gone, and you can simply drag their trapped leg between yours into half guard.
But experienced top players anticipate this geometry. They proactively hide their feet,
They cross their ankles tightly under your tailbone or clamp their heels tight to your hips.
making the ankle completely inaccessible. But the text addresses this with advanced mechanics, like the knee-centered escape.
Often called the rising shrimp. It bypasses the ankle entirely and relies heavily on that center of gravity displacement we discussed earlier.
You elevate your hips and roll aggressively onto one shoulder. Executing a deep rising shrimp physically pushes the opponent's head and upper body outside the vertical line of their supporting knee.
Their weight becomes cantilevered over that knee, rather than resting safely directly above it.
Because all their mass shifts to one side to maintain balance, their far knee on the opposite side becomes completely unloaded.
It loses its connection to the floor, and that unloaded knee is the target.
You bring your own free knee up, invert it so your toes point down, and slice it directly underneath their unloaded knee, securing an inside wedge.
But the friction point occurs when the top player recognizes the threat of that wedge.
And they forcefully squeeze their thighs together, a maximal knee clamp,
Shoving your knee directly through that muscular clamp will quickly burn out your hip flexors.
and accomplish absolutely nothing. The mechanical solution detailed here is the leg shimmy.
It's an elegant biomechanical solution. The adductor muscles in the human thigh cannot fire maximally while adjusting to continuous, rapid oscillation.
The text uses a brilliant analogy for this. It's like trying to take off a pair of jeans that are way too tight.
Right. Grabbing the waistband and pushing straight down just engages the full friction of the fabric.
You get nowhere. To bypass the friction, you have to shimmy your hips side to side, exploiting the micro-expansions in the fabric.
And applied to the mat, you elevate your foot off the floor to remove ground friction and rhythmically oscillate your hips side to side.
Every sway expands the gap between their clamping knees by a fraction of an inch.
Your knee slips into that microscopic space. Over several rapid oscillations, you worm your knee entirely through a clamp that was muscularly impossible to defeat with linear force.
And during all this lateral movement, there is an iron rule, the belly button iron rule.
Your primary arm is actively pushing their knee, but your secondary elbow is framing against their opposite hip.
And that secondary elbow must never drift across the center line of their body.
If it crosses their belly button, you hand them a catastrophic lever. They can effortlessly slide to your back.
It must stay glued to the outside of their hip at all times.
The entire escape system culminates in what the text formally calls the serpentine motion.
Escaping the mount is never a single explosive movement.
No, it's a mandatory, continuous sequence of at least 3 lateral hip displacements.
East, west, east. You shrimp to the right to attack and capture the left leg. You shrimp to the left, pull that captured leg inside your guard.
Then you must shrimp to the right again to completely clear your hips from their remaining pressure.
Finalizing the escape into a neutral position, this is where I've definitely messed up in the past. Trying to shortcut the system out of urgency.
You capture the first leg, and then just try to use abdominal strength to force your guard closed.
Without doing that final third hip-clearing shrimp, you just end up stuck in a tangled, flattened half guard carrying all their weight again.
The text is brutal about this reality. Partial execution is identical to no execution.
Because doing 2/3 of the escape and stopping just informs a highly skilled opponent of your exact intentions.
It leaves you structurally compromised halfway between positions, which is exactly where submissions happen.
You have to commit to the full serpentine sequence to actually reorganize the geometry.
The elegance of this entire system is that it eschews memorizing 100 separate, flashy techniques.
It's not about that at all. It demands mastery of core physical principles under immense pressure.
Displacing the center of gravity, generating kuzushi, and maintaining strict structural frame boundaries.
So you don't get crushed in transition.
Knowledge is most valuable when applied. These principles of geometric leverage and misdirection apply to unbalancing any entrenched system.
Physical or otherwise.
Right. You don't always have to overpower an obstacle with sheer force. Sometimes you just have to systematically tilt it enough that it defeats itself.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? True problem solving often requires tilting the obstacle. But before we wrap, I want to leave you with a thought that builds on all this.
Okay.
The manual details the physical mechanics of escaping, but imagine the immense psychological toll on the top player.
Oh, absolutely.
You've achieved the dominant position. You're physically crushing your opponent in the mount. But suddenly, your perfectly stable coaxial position feels like trying to stand up in a canoe in rough water.
Because your mass is constantly being manipulated from below.
Right. You widen your base to feel safe, and that exact action gets your leg captured by a trap you didn't see.
How quickly does that mechanical frustration turn into mental exhaustion?
And panic. The panic of realizing your dominant position is actually an elaborate trap.
When their foundation becomes unreliable, their decision-making degrades.
It's something to mull over the next time you face an immovable object. Maybe the way to break it isn't with blunt force, but by making its own foundation feel so unstable that it collapses under its own weight. We'll see you next time.